Hey everyone, it's Nick. In this video, I'm going to show you how to humanize your drums in FL Studio and Ableton Live. However, these techniques are applicable in virtually all DAWs. I want to start by saying that I think the best way to achieve like a human groove or swing or a pocket as it's known is to sometimes, if you're able to, play it in with a keyboard, a pad-based controller, or even your QWERTY keyboard. And even if your timing is loose or off, you can always quantize it by a certain percentage to get it back onto the grid or closer to the grid. Ultimately, to make your drums sound more humanistic, we want to get it off the perfect grid. And we also want to kind of make velocity variations because as a drummer or percussionist playing in these patterns, you're going to have some variations in how you play the patterns in. I want to focus on how to program these patterns in this video. So I have a project I put together for this video, and let's take a listen to the melodic components before we add in the drums. We're just going to put in a basic hip hop beat with the backbeat on 2 and 4, the kicks on 1 and the 3rd beat, and then the hats on every 2 steps. So that's 8th notes. So let's go to the hat pattern specifically. I'm going to select the hats here. One of the ways we can actually achieve a human feel is velocity. That's like an easy way. And just by taking the velocity of every other note down, having maybe the second note play louder, that gives maybe a more humanistic feeling already. So the timing of the note is actually going to be the biggest factor in making this maybe groove a little bit more. And what we're going to do is maybe try to take the second note here and push it back a little bit. And so what we're essentially now going to do is starting to swing the note. So essentially, when you start to move the notes off the grid, you're getting a little less accurate with the time, more human, less robotic. Rather than do this manually, which I think doing it manually is a great way, I'm going to show you how to do a cool like manual, your own custom groove. We can actually use presets. So I'm going to Command A to highlight all, and then Alt Q or Option Q. You're going to see the piano roll quantizer. And when we hit this folder icon, this is going to bring up our presets. The most basic presets are going to be in the snap folder. These really adhere to our grid size and are really useful for making it sound robotic and clean up the timing. What we actually want to do is kind of break the timing a little bit. And that's where these kind of presets here and the humanizing presets are really useful. So, I like the 8th note ones because I know that my hats are an 8th note pattern. So listen to the difference here. If I select 8th hip hop, you can see. Well, actually, the timing didn't change too much, but I can see the velocity changed. Maybe 8 laid back. And you can see if you zoom in, it did change some of the placements of the notes to make them a little later. And that's going to give a human feeling. And it also changed the velocity window down here, some of those notes. So that's also contributing to that groove. The other thing I like to do to add a little variance to the sound is pitch the hi-hats differently. So we'll select every other hi-hat and then just take them down maybe to 5 semitones down. Three semitones sounds a little nicer. So let's add a little kick syncopation. And we want to make sure that the groove is the same. So we're going to highlight it and Alt Q, and we're going to keep that. Well, actually, we don't want the surf rock. We want it laid back. So let's go ahead and do that. And notice it did push the 16th note away, and that's because the pattern was based off of 8th notes. So that's important to take note. How fine is the resolution of your rhythm? How, like if there are 16th notes in the pattern, you need to find a groove or a quantization template that supports 16ths. Now that sounds a little rigid, so I'm going to actually slide that in a little bit. If I hold Option or Alt, that will slide it off the grid. Again, getting off the grid's good in this case. And the velocity is nice. I'm actually going to accent this one. And yeah, having like a discrepancy between the two notes that are quick sounds pretty human because, again, you're thinking a drummer is trying to use maybe a pedal to play those two notes. And naturally, it's hard. It's really hard. The drummers achieve to try to play it as consistently as possible. But sometimes it sounds nice when it doesn't. And it sounds definitely more human if it doesn't. All right, so that was applying swing or groove within the piano roll. There's a few other ways you can do it in FL Studio. Really quick, I'm going to show you them. One way is to actually open up the sampler instrument, go to the miscellaneous functions tab, and then you're going to actually see swing here under the time section. Now, I already have it up because I had the master swing up, and you can actually do that here in the channel rack. Right at the very top, that's the master swing. So those are some ways you can get off the grid and kind of make a more human sound with your drums. Of course, sound selection is really important. If you pick sounds that sound like they come from the same drum set or drum kit, that will definitely help if you're trying to pull off that type of sound. So what I can do is try to substitute another hi-hat sound in the place of the original hi-hat. So it maybe sounds like the stick is hitting the hi-hat at a different angle or a position. The last thing I want to show you in FL Studio is how to make your own custom quantization presets, which is really cool. So maybe I'm going to take a loop from Splice, like a hi-hat loop that already has maybe a type of groove to it. So I'm going to search for loops, and then let's hear this. You and I know you. Cool. So this Mr. Carmack loop has a nice swing or shuffle to it. It's not going to necessarily sound great in this beat, but let me just show you for demonstration purposes. I'm going to put in a new Slice X. So go ahead, just put in a new instance of Slice X. And then if you take the loop and put it in, by default, it should chop to the transients. And then what we can do is go into the piano roll here, right click P for piano roll. You're going to see the timing here is not quite on the grid the whole time. Like there's some of the shuffle you hear. Let me solo this and take off the global swing because that will actually mess up the swing pattern we have right here. So you can hear that it has some swing. To save this, all we have to do is go File, Save Score As. On Mac, you're going to want to navigate to FL Studio Contents, then Resources, FL, Data. Then you're going to go into Patches and then Scores, Quantization. Wow, that is pretty deep in the file structure, but it's nice finding this spot because then I can name this under my user folder, Carmack Swing. I already kind of saved that there, but Swing. So it's really nice to take a loop or a full song, put into Slice X to get capture the groove or the pocket, if you will, and then save that as a preset so you can recall it on your own MIDI patterns. All right, in Ableton, I'm going to show you the same techniques. I'm going to do it on this 4 on the floor house beat. And what we have here is this intro section of a track I'm working on. And I'm going to add a 16th note closed hi-hat. And this is very simple for demonstration purposes. But again, these techniques can be applied to the whole drum set, kick, clap. In this case, it's a house track. So I'm only really going to focus on humanizing the hi-hats. So rather than duplicate this across, listen to this hi-hat pattern. I found a similar hi-hat that maybe could have been struck with the left hand or at a slightly different angle because, again, as a drummer, you're using 2 different hands to play these faster patterns, and the way you play the hi-hat, it's going to sound slightly different. Again, this comes back to sound selection, and by using 2 different hi-hats that sound very similar, that can maybe make a more human feeling. So I'm going to duplicate this across. Now, Ableton's quantized menu doesn't have the groove settings. We can do that separately in Ableton's UI on the groove pool. And that's this very tiny wavy icon on the left. That'll open our groove pool. Let's expand this window a little bit. As you can see, I have some preset grooves here, and you can save these inside of your stock template. So I do recommend maybe finding some favorite grooves, putting them in your template and having them there so that they're available. But by default, this will actually be empty until you find a groove. And if we go into Ableton, we can find a groove here. The swing, you're going to hear the difference. Maybe I'm going to find a 16th note because I know I'm using 16th notes. I'm going to find a 16th swing. So maybe right here. And if you simply just drag and drop, we could go into the groove pool, but if you actually just drag and drop directly on the clip you want, that will apply the groove. So let's listen to the difference there. Here's without the groove and with the groove. And if I actually want to see that reflected in the piano roll, I can go to the commit, and that's going to actually then move the notes to the place you're actually hearing them. But then you can't actually maybe change the percentage here. So in the groove pool here, this percentage is the most important thing, I think. That is the overall timing for each groove selected here. So if I take it to 0, it's back to robotic straight. And as I slide it up, it gets more groove or swing. But another technique I might actually do on this is take the velocity and maybe nudge some of the notes off the grid even further. In Ableton, the velocity is down here, and maybe we can go to pencil mode by hitting B. I can go in here and kind of just get some random velocities. And then if I actually want to nudge notes off, I can take it, select it. As I'm dragging, then hold Command, and that's gonna get off the grid. So I would recommend going through, searching groove, going into each of these .agr files, which are these groove templates, and applying them to your drums so you can hear how it gives a different feeling. To get your own custom groove files, it's really easy in Ableton. I'm gonna take that same Mr. Carmack hi-hat, and all you have to do is get into the project. So I'm gonna just drag and drop it onto this audio track, and then drag and drop that into the groove pool. It's gonna extract the groove from the audio clip, meaning it's going to look for transients and map them out to the timing of the grid. And then it's going to be able to apply that to your MIDI pattern. So if I go to this MIDI pattern, I can say Mr. Carmack, and so it has that stutter towards the end of the phrase. I wanted to point out that the bass and the drums have a lot of the same swing, which is really important. Here's the bass section without any groove. Let's listen to that. I'm going to take this swing 16 down to 0%. That's the groove that's applied to the bass. And listen to this section without any groove. So now I'm going to kick it up to 74% and take a listen. I'm going to hit commit so you can actually see the notes move. So you can hear that applying the groove to your bass and maybe your melody, your chords, effects can be a really good way to get more of a cohesive pocket and feeling to your song, and also to add a slight shuffle or human feeling sometimes. Cool, so those were some tips to make your drums sound less robotic, more human. And again, that was using velocity, discrepancies between notes, because humans don't always hit the instrument perfectly consistently. That was also moving notes off of the grid. We used a lot of these presets in FL Studio and Ableton that kind of already had a groove or a pocket to them, a human feeling. So those techniques were really useful for drums as well as other instruments. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel. Turn on that notification bell. We'll be releasing tutorials weekly, production videos, tips and tricks, challenges, interviews. As always, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Stay healthy, stay positive, and I'll see y'all next time.